When luxurious mansions and smug smiles become the backdrop of a family drama, and wealth and status are mere illusions of unity, what happens when one player changes the rules? Sylvester Caldwell, the perfect husband and father, endured years of mockery and indifference from his family. But one seemingly innocent dance break becomes the trigger for an avalanche of events that will turn his wife's and daughter's lives upside down. This story is about the consequences of the choices we make in pursuit of the illusion of happiness. Are you ready to find out what happens when the music stops? My dear friend, be sure to subscribe to my channel if this is your first time here, and give your royal like to this video. Sylvester Caldwell stood in the sprawling walk-in closet he'd meticulously designed to his exact preferences, slowly fastening the buttons on his freshly ironed dress shirt. From his vantage point, he could see the master bathroom through the open door, its mirrors capturing and multiplying his reflection. They displayed a man who outwardly embodied achievement, yet inside, he felt adrift in a life he no longer recognized as his own. The morning light filtering through frosted glass highlighted the streaks of gray in his dark hair, subtle testaments to 25 years of marriage and the passage of time that seemed to weigh heavier than it should. From the hallway came the familiar sound of laughter. His wife Bernilla and their daughter Patricia were sharing yet another one of their inside jokes. The echo of their heels against the polished marble floors, a luxury from last year's renovation, grew louder as they approached. "Mom, the red dress is the winner!" Patricia's voice rang out, brimming with enthusiasm. "The black one is nice, but the red? It's unforgettable!" "You think it's appropriate for a family reunion?" Bernilla's tone hinted at faux hesitation. Sylvester, overhearing, knew her mind had already been made up. He'd watched her spend hours scrutinizing racks at Neiman Marcus before selecting that very dress. "Appropriate? It's perfect," Patricia replied with a teasing lilt. "Part of the fun is making everyone else feel underdressed. And besides," her voice dipped into a mischievous tone that made Sylvester pause mid-motion, "certain people will appreciate a woman who knows how to stand out." The implied emphasis on certain people tightened Sylvester's jaw. He knew exactly whom Patricia was referring to, John Vandenberg, a name that had resurfaced with irritating frequency since the reunion guest list was announced. "Patricia!" Bernilla's voice carried a half-hearted reprimand that barely masked her amusement. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why not?" Patricia retorted with playful sarcasm. "It's not like Dad's even paying attention. He's probably in there calculating how much that shirt cost per wear." Their shared laughter spilled down the hallway and settled over Sylvester like an unwelcome chill. Silently, he resumed knotting his tie, the memory of learning the Windsor knot for his wedding flashing briefly in his mind. That day had been filled with anticipation and optimism for the family he hoped to build. Now, it felt like a mocking echo of what he'd lost. When he finally emerged, the master bedroom was a chaotic display of discarded luxury. The bed was strewn with designer outfits, each piece likely worth more than the car he'd driven in his 20s. Bernilla stood before the full-length mirror, her reflection a vision of calculated allure in the red dress. Its daring neckline and form-fitting design left little to the imagination, a statement piece that invited admiration. Patricia lounged nearby, engrossed in her phone, indifferent to the clutter around her. "The bathroom counter looks like a cosmetic counter after a sale," Sylvester observed, his tone restrained despite his simmering frustration. "We need to leave in 30 minutes. Bernilla waved a dismissive hand without turning. "Don't stress. No one arrives exactly on time to these things. We have plenty of leeway." "Relax, Dad," Patricia added, her eyes rolling dramatically. "This isn't one of your board meetings where everyone lines up at attention. You're so rigid." "The invitation says 2 o'clock, Sylvester countered, beginning to gather the scattered clothing. "It's already 1:30, and the drive to the country club isn't exactly short." "Just leave it," Bernilla snapped, finally glancing at him. "Rosa will deal with it tomorrow. That's why we pay her." "Rosa shouldn't have to clean up unnecessary messes," Sylvester replied firmly, hanging up one of the abandoned dresses. "It's a matter of respect." Patricia groaned, throwing her head back theatrically. Here we go. Another lecture about treating people right. Dad, normal people don't obsess over their cleaning staff's feelings. Rosa is a person, Sylvester shot back, his voice steady but edged with weariness. She deserves respect, just like anyone else who works hard to make our lives easier. Patricia's tone shifted to syrupy sweetness. Speaking of making lives easier, did you transfer the money for my spring break trip? Sylvester paused, holding a dress mid-air. We talked about this yesterday. $2,000 for a weekend in Miami is excessive, especially considering last month's credit card bills. Mom already said it's fine, Patricia replied, her sweetness evaporating into irritation. Of course it's fine, Bernilla chimed in, spraying a cloud of perfume. Heaven forbid our daughter enjoys her college years instead of pinching pennies like a miser. There's a difference between being responsible and being stingy, Sylvester said, the familiar ache of frustration building. I work hard to provide for this family. And here we go, Patricia groaned, throwing her arms up. The St. Sylvester speech about how much he sacrifices for his ungrateful family. Should we applaud now or later? Bernilla's laughter sliced through the air as she applied another layer of lipstick. Just transfer the money, darling. We can afford it. Unless... Her gaze turned sharp, scrutinizing him. Is there something you're not telling us about our finances? The insinuation stung. After years of meticulously growing their wealth, her doubt felt like a betrayal. The finances are fine, he said curtly. This is about teaching values. Your values are prehistoric, Patricia said with a smirk. Maybe if you worried less about retirement and more about actually living, you wouldn't be so... boring. The barb hit its mark. Resigned, Sylvester pulled out his phone and authorized the transfer. $2,000 gone, along with another piece of his resolve. Thanks, Daddy, Patricia chirped as her phone buzzed with the notification. She pranced over to join her mother at the mirror, the two of them admiring their reflections as if no one else existed. Sylvester glanced at them, the tableau a glaring reminder of everything that had unraveled, their exclusion of him, their dismissiveness, and their casual exploitation of his efforts. We should go, he said quietly, slipping on his suit jacket. Traffic will be heavy. 5 more minutes, Bernilla replied, not even looking up. You wouldn't understand. Perfection takes time. Patricia's laugh punctuated the remark, and something inside Sylvester shifted. As he stood there, watching their deliberate preparations for an audience that did not include him, a single question surfaced. When had the family he dreamed of building become so unrecognizable? When had his wife's captivating charm become a dagger aimed at his heart instead of the jewel he had once cherished? And at what moment did his daughter replace affection with cunning in her interactions with him? Standing in the bedroom he had paid for but never truly claimed as his own, Sylvester Caldwell, immaculately dressed in his custom-tailored suit, stood on the precipice of an emotional reckoning. The question that gnawed at him was whether he was approaching a revelation or a collapse. The car's waiting, he said evenly before turning to leave the room. Neither his wife nor his daughter acknowledged him. They were engrossed in an animated debate over whether Bernilla should wear the diamond tennis bracelet or the sapphire one, both gifts from anniversaries past that had been received with indifferent politeness. As Sylvester descended the sweeping staircase, the bright, trivial laughter from above faded into the distance, replaced by the weight of what lay ahead. Today's reunion wasn't just a social event. It felt like a crossroads. Deep down, he knew that this day would irrevocably shift the dynamics of his family. He feared their choices were leading them toward a future marked by regret. The drive to the country club tested Sylvester's patience, Patricia's voice filling the car with a relentless stream of updates from the family group chat, her energy brimming with artificial cheer. Uncle James just arrived, she announced, her fingers flying across her phone. And guess what? He's brought his new Mercedes. Mom, any guesses about who's probably with him? Bernilla adjusted her lipstick in the visor mirror, her voice carrying a practiced air of disinterest. Oh, I hadn't given it much thought, she replied, the falsehood as sweetly scented as the perfume saturating the car's interior. For days, their conversations had revolved around John Vandenberg's impending appearance at the reunion, his recent divorce, and the meteoric success of his investment firm. The parking lot's filling up, Sylvester noted as they neared the club. If we'd left when I suggested— "Oh, please, Dad," Patricia cut him off, leaning forward. "No one cares about parking spots except you. Mom's got to make an entrance, isn't that right?" Bernilla's smile was cool and calculated. "A lady is never the first to arrive. It's undignified." "Exactly," Patricia chimed in with a smirk. "Being fashionably late for old friends is a whole different game." Sylvester parked the car deliberately, drawing out the act as if stalling the inevitable. He braced himself for what awaited, the silent ache of watching his wife's face light up for another man. "Look, there's Uncle James's car," Patricia exclaimed, already reaching for the door handle before the engine had fully stilled. "And guess who's with him?" Through the windshield, Sylvester saw them, James and his wife, Susan, engaged in conversation with a tall, impeccably dressed man whose air of confidence dominated the scene. Even from this distance, John Vandenberg's charisma was unmistakable. "Well," Bernilla said, smoothing her dress as she exited the car, "let's not keep everyone waiting." The walk to the entrance felt heavy, as though he were marching toward his own undoing. Sylvester couldn't miss the subtle shift in Bernilla's demeanor. Her stride became lighter, her smile brighter, and her posture more poised. She casually adjusted her perfectly styled hair, while Patricia practically radiated excitement, her matchmaking instincts in full swing. "Bernilla Caldwell, you're absolutely glowing," John called out, his polished voice carrying an ease that grated on Sylvester. John moved toward them with open arms, as though it were his right to embrace another man's wife. "John," Bernilla replied warmly, stepping into his embrace with a fervor that made Sylvester's chest tighten. "You look incredible. Life in Silicon Valley must agree with you." "Not as much as time has agreed with you," John replied, his gaze lingering a moment too long. Turning to Patricia, he added, "And this can't be little Patricia. Last time I saw you, you were barely as tall as your mother's waist." "Hi, Mr. Vandenberg," Patricia said, her charm dialed to perfection. "Mom's told me so many stories about you." "All flattering, I hope?" John's laugh was effortless, his glance flicking back to Bernilla. "Of course," Patricia replied with a playful smile. "Especially the ones about college. She says you were an amazing dancer." Sylvester stepped forward, inserting himself between John and Bernilla. "John," he said tersely. John barely acknowledged him with a nod before refocusing on Bernilla. "We'll have to see if your mother remembers any of our old moves later," he said. Before Sylvester could respond, James and Susan joined them, steering the conversation into safer, more general territory. Still, Sylvester couldn't shake the sight of how John hovered near Bernilla, or how she seemed to bloom in his presence. Meanwhile, Patricia's efforts to spotlight her mother and John didn't go unnoticed. Inside the country club, the grand hall buzzed with lively conversations amid a backdrop of fresh flowers and colorful banners. Relatives clustered in groups, their chatter blending into a constant hum that couldn't drown out Bernilla's laughter at John's remarks. "Sylvester!" His cousin Michael appeared, a drink in hand. "Still dominating the tech world?" "It's been a productive year," Sylvester replied, his attention divided between Michael and the magnetic pull between John and Bernilla. "I heard about your Singapore deal. What was it, 50 million? 67, Sylvester corrected, watching Patricia orchestrate the room to keep her mother and John as the centerpiece of attention. "Impressive," Michael said with a low whistle. "Funny to think how John tried to compete with you back in college. His startup flopped while yours skyrocketed. Though I hear he's doing well these days. Just bought a place in the Hamptons, didn't he?" The irony wasn't lost on Sylvester. The beach house Bernilla had once yearned for, dismissed by him as a frivolous indulgence, was now John's latest prize. He could already predict the barbed comments awaiting him on the drive home, criticisms about his practicality, his inability to understand what his wife truly desired. All afternoon, Sylvester observed the delicate, unspoken dance unfolding before him. While Bernilla and John never crossed any overt lines, their connection was impossible to ignore. Their gazes lingered a moment too long, their touches carried a faint intimacy, and Patricia's calculated maneuvers ensured they remained the center of attention. It was a performance, subtle but excruciating, and Sylvester could do little but endure. Patricia had perfected the subtle art of crafting conversations that highlighted her mother's grace while subtly tarnishing her father's image. "Mom's working on this incredible gala," she would mention casually to one group, then turn to another with a conspiratorial grin. "Can you believe Dad didn't think she could handle the pressure? He thought it would overwhelm her." Each comment, seemingly innocuous, added to a larger, damning picture. Bit by bit, Sylvester was cast as the villain of the family narrative, a rigid husband stifling his wife's brilliance, a disconnected father out of touch with his daughter's life. "Dinner is ready," Susan interrupted, appearing beside him with a polite smile. "We're seated at table 3, she continued, gesturing to the seating chart. "You, Bernilla, Patricia, James, me, and," she paused briefly, "John, of course." Sylvester's gaze fell on his designated chair, perfectly positioned to grant him an unobstructed view of his wife and her former lover throughout the evening. He wondered if Patricia had deliberately arranged it. It wouldn't be surprising. As they made their way to the table, Sylvester caught his reflection in one of the ornate mirrors lining the hallway. The figure staring back at him was painfully familiar. A successful businessman in a meticulously tailored suit, the epitome of stability. Yet beneath the polished exterior, he saw himself as his wife and daughter likely did, predictable, conventional, and uninspiring. A single question gnawed at him. What would they think when he finally defied their expectations? The dining room of the country club shimmered with golden light, refracted through chandeliers onto elegant table settings. At table 3, Sylvester sat rigidly as Bernilla, ever composed, captivated the group with her easy charm. "Do you remember that spring break in Cancun?" John asked suddenly, his voice slicing through the conversation. "The way you danced on the beach, Bernilla, I've never seen anything so unforgettable." Bernilla's laughter rang out, warm and genuine, a sound Sylvester hadn't heard directed at him in years. "Oh, those were wild days," she replied, her smile tinged with nostalgia. "That little beach bar where they taught us salsa." "Mom was incredible," Patricia interjected, her tone laced with intent. "She's still the best dancer I know. It's such a shame Dad doesn't enjoy watching her dance anymore." The subtle jab landed, eliciting knowing looks around the table. Sylvester turned his focus to his steak, finding a measure of solace in the precise rhythm of cutting and chewing. "Your father has always preferred more predictable activities," Bernilla remarked, her tone dismissive as she sipped her wine. "Budgets, investments, retirement plans, that's his idea of adventure." James attempted to break the tension with a nervous chuckle. "Well, Sylvester's business savvy has certainly been rewarding. That tech acquisition was a masterstroke, wasn't it?" "Oh, undoubtedly," Bernilla replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "He's brilliant with numbers. It's just a pity he forgets there's more to life than spreadsheets." "Like spontaneity," John chimed in, raising his glass toward Bernilla. "Living in the moment, taking chances, dancing when the music calls." Sylvester set his utensils down with deliberate precision, the soft clink silencing the table briefly. "Some risks aren't worth taking," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel. Patricia rolled her eyes dramatically. "That's exactly your problem, Dad. Everything has to be calculated. You're so afraid of living." "There's a difference between living and being reckless," Sylvester countered, his tone steady despite the heat rising in his chest. Bernilla's sharp laugh cut through the air. "Reckless? That's what you call enjoying life? No wonder we don't go out anymore. When was the last time you took me dancing, or did anything spontaneous?" Her words hung heavily over the table. Susan picked at her salad, while James buried himself in his glass of water. Only John seemed unperturbed, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I remember when you loved dancing," he said softly, his eyes lingering on Bernilla. "You moved like it was second nature. It's a tragedy to let that go to waste." Soft music wafted in from the ballroom, a slow and romantic melody. Rising smoothly, John extended his hand toward Bernilla. "May I have this dance?" Patricia beamed with excitement. "Oh, Mom, you should! When was the last time you danced with someone who actually appreciated it?" Sylvester stood slowly, his voice cutting through the moment with chilling clarity. If you dance with him, Bernilla, I will leave you." The murmur of nearby conversations faded as the tension from their table spilled into the room. Bernilla's eyes widened in disbelief before narrowing in fury. "Are you seriously threatening me over a dance?" she hissed, her cheeks flushing. "Dad, stop being absurd," Patricia snapped, her tone dripping with contempt. "It's just a dance. You're making a scene." Sylvester's gaze held firm. "You heard me," he said evenly, his words as unyielding as granite. "Make your choice." Bernilla rose to her feet, her posture defiant. The crimson fabric of her dress shimmered in the light, a striking contrast to the chill in her eyes. "You don't own me, Sylvester," she declared. "I'm not one of your employees." "Exactly," Patricia added, aligning herself with her mother. "Maybe if you weren't so controlling, Mom wouldn't need someone else to make her feel valued." The dining room had gone utterly silent, every pair of eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Sylvester looked between his wife and daughter, their solidarity as unshakable as ever. The realization hit him with brutal clarity. In their eyes, he was little more than a provider, a utility. "This is your last chance, Bernilla," he said, his voice low but heavy with finality. "Don't do this." Bernilla's fierce gaze never wavered as she reached for John's hand. Smiling bitterly, she said, "Let's dance, John. I'd love to." As they moved to the dance floor, John's hand rested possessively on her waist. The music swelled, intimate and slow, their closeness leaving no doubt about their intentions. Bernilla laughed softly at something John whispered, her happiness a stark contrast to the storm raging within Sylvester. Her fingers grazed his shoulder lightly, the kind of touch that spoke of years of shared routine. "Happy now, Dad?" Patricia's voice carried a sharp edge, her sarcasm as thick as the moment was tense. She resumed scrolling through her phone, dismissing the scene with an exaggerated sigh. "Mom's right. You really need to get over these issues of yours." But Sylvester's gaze had already shifted elsewhere. His eyes locked onto John's hand, resting far too comfortably on Bernilla's lower back as she leaned toward him. Their faces were so close they could have been sharing the same breath. 25 years of marriage, marked by sacrifices and a quiet endurance, seemed to crumble in that instant, dissolving under the weight of betrayal he could no longer ignore. Without a word, Sylvester stood and walked away from the table. His steps echoed across the polished floor, deliberate and unhurried, distancing him from the cacophony of music and laughter. Behind him, Patricia's scoff rang out, accompanied by the imagined glances she and Bernilla likely exchanged. They'd expect him to return, subdued and ready to resume his role as their silent enabler. But as Sylvester stepped into the crisp night air, the cold matched the steely determination hardening inside him. He got into the car, a luxury model Bernilla had insisted upon for appearances, and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, the warm glow of the clubhouse lingered, a symbol of the life he was about to leave behind. He imagined them there, oblivious, celebrating their shallow victory. They didn't realize this was the last time. Their carefully curated world of entitlement was about to implode. Sylvester Caldwell, the man they underestimated, had finally had enough. As he drove into the night, his mind buzzed with plans. If they thought they controlled the dance, they'd soon learn otherwise. This time, he'd be setting the rhythm. The morning after the reunion, Bernilla awoke to an empty bed and a string of missed calls from Patricia. She reached for her phone, still groggy from an evening of indulgence. "What is it, Patricia?" she asked, suppressing a yawn. "It's barely 9. "Mom, Dad's not answering." Patricia's voice crackled through the line, laced with unease. "I've been calling him all morning. Have you heard from him?" Bernilla frowned, tossing the silk sheets aside as she moved to check the closet. "He's probably brooding at the office," she replied dismissively. "You know how dramatic he can be." "I already tried the office," Patricia interrupted, her tone sharp with worry. "Jessica said he hasn't shown up, and his schedule's completely cleared for the next month." A flicker of uncertainty passed over Bernilla as she opened the closet door. The rows of neatly pressed suits were gone. Drawers that should have held his belongings were empty. Even his leather briefcase was missing. He took everything, she murmured. What do you mean everything? Patricia's voice pitched higher. Are you serious? His suits, his casual clothes, even those hideous golf shirts he loves, Bernilla stammered, rifling through the barren closet. They're all gone. Patricia's response came in a hushed whisper. You don't think he was serious? About leaving? Bernilla shook her head, her confidence faltering. Don't be ridiculous. Your father's not bold enough to pull something like this. He's just trying to make a point. Should we call Uncle Michael? Patricia asked hesitantly. Maybe he knows something. No, Bernilla snapped, closing the closet door. We're not letting him embarrass us like this. He'll be back once he's done sulking. But as the hours crept by, doubt gnawed at her. His toothbrush was missing from the bathroom. The study no longer housed his laptop. Even his reading glasses were gone from the bedside table. When the doorbell rang, Bernilla nearly spilled her wine. Opening the door, she found Patricia standing there, disheveled and gripping her phone. Have you checked the accounts? Patricia demanded, pushing past her mother into the foyer. What for? Bernilla asked, trailing after her. That's your father's responsibility. Patricia headed straight for the study, logging into the computer. Because Dad controls everything financially, she said. Remember last month? You couldn't even log into the bank. Bernilla rolled her eyes but leaned in as the page loaded. This is absurd, she muttered. Patricia's fingers flew over the keyboard, her face paling as she scanned the numbers. The joint account, she whispered. It's empty. There's only $5,000 left. That can't be right! Bernilla pushed Patricia aside, gripping the mouse. There was $500,000 in there. Check the investments. Patricia opened another tab, her face growing grimmer. Those are wiped out too. Everything was transferred in the last 12 hours. He can't do this! Bernilla's voice rose in panic. That money belongs to me as well! It's not a mistake, Mom, Patricia said quietly. Everything's in his name. He has full control. You wanted it that way, remember? The phone's ring shattered the silence. Bernilla grabbed it, her voice trembling with hope. This is Mrs. Caldwell. This is American Express, an unfamiliar voice responded. We're calling about changes to your account. There must be some mistake, Bernilla interjected quickly. Your husband contacted us this morning to remove you as an authorized user, the representative explained. As the primary card holder, he has the right to do so. I'm also calling to inform you that your cards have been deactivated. Bernilla leaned back into the smooth leather of Sylvester's office chair, her grip unsteady on the wine glass in her hand. This can't be happening. I'm his wife, she muttered, her voice quivering with disbelief. With a sharp motion, she ended the call and turned to Patricia, her eyes wide with panic. Your father has completely lost it. Call him again, Patricia demanded, her tone edged with urgency. Call everyone, his friends, co-workers, anyone who might have seen him. Her fingers flew across her phone screen as she scrolled through contacts, dialing number after number, but each call ended the same, voicemail. The futility of it all deepened their frustration, feeding their growing fear. What about my tuition? Patricia's voice broke into the tense silence, her face pale as realization dawned. And my spring break trip? The transfer he made yesterday? Before she could finish, her phone buzzed. The call was from the bank. The transfer's been reversed, Patricia whispered, her hand trembling as she spoke. Every last cent. That vindictive fool, Bernilla spat, pacing the room with frantic energy. All of this over a stupid dance? He's gone mad. Mom! Patricia's voice softened, carrying a note of vulnerability that made her sound younger. What are we going to do? The house payment's due next week and none of your cards are working. We'll figure something out, Bernilla replied with forced resolve. Her hand shook as she lifted the wine glass to her lips. He's probably hiding out in some hotel, waiting for us to beg him to come back. But their frantic attempts to track him down, calling every hotel in and out of the city, led nowhere. Slowly, the truth began to crystallize. Sylvester Caldwell, the dependable and predictable man they thought they knew, had outmaneuvered them completely. Maybe, Patricia hesitated, picking at her nails nervously. We could call John. He knows his way around finances. Bernilla let out a bitter, almost hysterical laugh. Oh, sure. Let's ask the man your father's convinced I'm having an affair with. That's bound to fix everything. We can't just sit here, Patricia shot back, her voice sharp with desperation. The electricity bill's due in 3 days, my tuition's about to bounce, and we're out of money. Admit it, Mom. Dad finally stood up for himself, and he's using it to ruin us. The chime of the doorbell cut through their argument, both women freezing in place. Bernilla rushed to the door, her heart caught between dread and hope. Instead of Sylvester, she found a courier holding an envelope. Mrs. Caldwell? The man asked, handing over a clipboard for her signature. Delivery for you? Bernilla signed with trembling hands and tore open the envelope. Sylvester's distinctive handwriting on the front page made her stomach twist. Inside was a list of account numbers and passwords, accompanied by a brief, cutting note. For tax purposes, everything is covered until the end of the month. After that, you're on your own. What does it say? Patricia asked, peering over her mother's shoulder. Bernilla crumpled the paper in her hand, her jaw tight. Your father's declaration of war. A week passed, and the full weight of their situation bore down on them. Bernilla sat at the kitchen island, surrounded by a sea of unpaid bills and financial statements, while Patricia paced the room, her phone pressed to her ear. Please, Mr. Vandenberg, Patricia cooed, her voice syrupy with artificial charm. Mom's really struggling right now, and you've always been so generous. From across the room, Bernilla could hear John's terse response. I'm sorry, Patricia, but I can't get involved. Your father's a powerful man, and this is too messy. But at the reunion last week, Patricia began, her voice wavering. That was a dance, John interrupted. This is something else entirely. My answer is no. The line went dead, leaving Patricia staring at her phone in disbelief. What a hypocrite, she muttered. All his talk about taking risks, and he won't even lend us enough to cover the mortgage. Men like John don't risk their wallets, Bernilla said bitterly, pushing away another overdue notice. Your father knew exactly what he was doing. Maybe we should call the police, Patricia suggested, sinking into a chair. File a missing person report. And tell them what? Bernilla shot back, her tone sharp. That your father left because I danced with someone else? That he withdrew his own money? They'd laugh us out of the precinct. The doorbell rang again, its chime filling the house with tension. This time, a man in a suit stood on the doorstep, a thick envelope in hand. Mrs. Caldwell, he said formally. Richard Dawson, from Caldwell Technology Corporation's legal team. Your husband asked me to deliver these. Bernilla stiffened. Legal team? What's this about? These documents pertain to changes in your beneficiary status for company holdings and insurance policies, he explained, handing over the envelope. Bernilla's hands shook as she scanned the papers inside. Her eyes widened in shock. He's removed me from everything, she said, her voice rising. As CEO and majority shareholder, it's within his rights, Richard replied evenly. The changes are already in effect. This is simply a formal notice. But I helped build that company, Bernilla protested. I hosted events, entertained clients, played the perfect wife for 25 years. I'm not authorized to discuss this further, Richard said before stepping back. Good day, Mrs. Caldwell. The door closed with a finality that echoed through the house. Bernilla turned to Patricia, who was reading over her shoulder. Mom, Patricia said, her voice quivering. What do we do now? My credit cards are maxed out, and the university's threatening to drop me from my classes if tuition isn't paid by Friday. Call your grandmother, Bernilla said, pouring herself another drink. Patricia let out a bitter laugh. I already did. She said, Your father's a good man who didn't deserve to watch his wife embarrass him in public. Then she hung up. Bernilla clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stay composed. Fine. What about the trust fund your father set up for you? Frozen, Patricia replied, slumping onto the couch. He changed the terms last week. I can't touch it until I'm 30, and only if I show financial responsibility and ethical behavior. The doorbell rang yet again, and they exchanged wary glances before answering. Another courier stood on the doorstep, holding yet another ominous envelope. 3 days prior, a flurry of emails had passed between him and John, issuing stark warnings. Avoid Bernilla or face the exposure of certain discrepancies buried in his company's financial records. He's accounted for everything, Patricia muttered, reading alongside her mother. Every scenario we might have tried to exploit. Your father's always had a gift for details, Bernilla replied, her tone laced with bitterness as she reached for her glass of scotch. I just never thought he'd use it against us. The phone interrupted them with a ring. It was Bernilla's regular hairstylist, notifying her that her standing appointment had been canceled. Soon after, her personal shopper called to inform her that all her store accounts had been closed. Next, the country club reached out to say her membership had been revoked. He's systematically erasing us, Bernilla whispered, each call striking another blow to her sense of identity. Everything we built, all we've known. Patricia's voice wavered, edged with despair. Maybe we should beg his forgiveness. Tell him how sorry we are about the reunion, about everything. I already have, Bernilla admitted, retrieving her phone to display a stream of ignored messages. Listen to this one from yesterday, she said, reading aloud. Please call me. We need to talk. What happened at the reunion was a mistake. Come back so we can fix this. And his reply? Patricia asked, her hope tenuous. Nothing. Bernilla's grip on the phone tightened. But an hour later, Rosa called to say she'd been given a generous severance package and glowing references for a new position. He's not just walking away, he's dismantling every bond that ties us together. Patricia's phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen, her face collapsing. Chelsea just canceled my invite to Aspen, she murmured. Dad told her father about the money I borrowed last month, money I promised I'd repay. Her voice cracked. He's turning everyone against us. All the little lies we thought were safe, Bernilla said bitterly, the scotch burning her throat. Every small deception uncovered. Mom! Patricia's voice trembled. I'm scared. I don't know how to manage without money? Bernilla finished for her, glancing at the luxurious surroundings that now felt oppressive. The weight of the truth settled over her. Neither do I, sweetheart. Neither do I. That evening, the doorbell rang. A courier handed over a small package. Inside was Bernilla's wedding ring, the one she'd left on her nightstand during the reunion because it clashed with her outfit. A note accompanied it. You made your decision. Now live with it. Bernilla stared at the ring, memories surging. She'd been so young and optimistic when Sylvester slipped it onto her finger. Back then, he'd seemed boring but dependable. She never imagined he could wield such cold precision. I always said your father was predictable, she remarked to Patricia, who sat frozen beside her. I was wrong. We never truly understood him. 2 weeks after Sylvester's departure, the Caldwell mansion had become lifeless. Without Rosa, dust coated the once immaculate furniture. A stack of unopened mail, many stamped "Final Notice," cluttered the entry table. Takeout containers piled up in the kitchen, as neither Bernilla nor Patricia had ever learned to cook. The chef, like Rosa, was now a memory, removed with ruthless precision. Your tuition payment bounced again, Bernilla called as Patricia descended the stairs, still clad in her designer pajamas at 2 in the afternoon. The university sent another email. I know, Patricia snapped, heading for the coffee maker. They're threatening to drop me from all my classes, as if things aren't humiliating enough. Maybe you should apply for a student loan, Bernilla suggested, scrolling through her phone. Or look for a part-time job? Patricia slammed her mug onto the counter, coffee spilling. A job? Do you realize what that would do to my reputation? Reputation? Bernilla let out a sharp laugh. Your so-called friends vanished the moment your credit cards were declined. Why? Because you had to dance with him. Patricia's face flushed with anger. You couldn't just say no, she shouted. You had to prove something, show you've still got it, that you could win over someone like John. Don't you dare blame me, Bernilla shot back, standing abruptly. Who pushed me? Go ahead, Mom. It's just a dance. Don't let Dad control you. I didn't think he'd actually leave, Patricia screamed. You always said he was weak, that he'd never stand up to us. You were supposed to know how to handle him. Handle him? Bernilla grabbed the wine bottle from the table. Your father spent 25 years playing the doormat while quietly preparing for this. Moving assets, making plans, waiting for us to cross the line. Some handler I turned out to be. The doorbell rang again, another unwelcome disturbance. Patricia opened it to find Madison, her best friend, standing uncertainly on the porch. Hey, Madison said awkwardly. I'm here to pick up my Birkin bag, the one I lent you. Patricia's face fell. Maddie, come on. We've been friends forever. You know I'll pay you back once this blows over. Madison hesitated. That's what you said about the concert tickets, she replied. And spring break and New York. My parents found out. They're forcing me to cut ties. Forcing you? Patricia's laugh was bitter. Right, like you've ever had an independent thought. You're just like everyone else, bailing when things get hard. You lied to me, Madison shot back. Over and over. You never meant to pay anyone back. You just took advantage, knowing your dad would clean up the mess. Patricia's expression hardened. Leave, she said coldly, slamming the door in her friend's face. Patricia's lip curled as she tossed the words over her shoulder, her tone dripping with contempt. If that bag means so much to you, keep it. I've got better ones anyway. Madison didn't bother turning around. Her voice was low, almost inaudible, but the sting was unmistakable. Not anymore, you don't. Good luck fooling your next set of friends. She slammed the door behind her, the force of it sending a shudder through the delicate crystal chandelier overhead. Patricia whirled around, startled, to find Bernilla standing in the doorway, her expression a mix of disapproval and weariness. What now? Patricia snapped, her tone razor-sharp. Bernilla's voice was steady but carried a weight far heavier than anger. How many people have you borrowed money from, Patricia? Patricia's eyes narrowed into slits. Oh, that's rich, coming from you. Should we start tallying your lies, Mother? Maybe begin with how you've been throwing yourself at John for years, wearing that ridiculous red dress because you knew he'd notice? Bernilla's face tightened, her jaw clenching. I am your mother. Patricia's laugh was sharp and devoid of humor. And you're a joke, a desperate, aging woman willing to do anything for a sliver of attention. Congratulations. We're left with nothing now. No friends, no money, no future. Hope it was worth it. The slap landed before Patricia even registered Bernilla's hand rising. The crack of it echoed through the room, leaving Patricia stunned, her hand flying to her reddened cheek. Her eyes glistened with a mix of shock and fury. You ungrateful child! Bernilla's voice trembled, raw with emotion. I gave you everything I had, and this is the thanks I get? Patricia's voice wavered but carried a bitter edge. You gave me nothing. Dad was the one who provided everything. We used him and now he's gone. And it's your fault. Bernilla's hand shook as she flung her wine glass against the wall, the red liquid splattering like blood on the pristine wallpaper. My fault? She screamed. Who was the one who kept pushing me at the reunion? Who called your father boring? Who wanted to teach him a lesson? Patricia's voice rose to a crescendo, tears streaming down her face. You taught me everything, every scam, every lie, every manipulation. Men need to be controlled, you said. Well, congratulations, Mom. You controlled Dad right out of our lives. Their argument was interrupted by the chime of the doorbell. A courier handed over a stack of papers. Patricia tore into them, her face paling as she scanned the contents. A lawsuit for unpaid credit card balances. The amount was staggering. Her breath hitched. I can't stay here anymore. This house is falling apart, and so are we. And where do you think you'll go? Bernilla's voice was icy. Your father froze your accounts. Your so-called friends are gone. You have nothing. Thanks to you, Patricia shot back, her voice cracking. She turned toward the stairs. I'll pack what's left. Maybe selling some of it will pay for university. Run away then, Bernilla spat. It's what you're best at. Just like with that boy last year. What was his name? The one whose father almost sued us? Patricia froze, her hand gripping the banister. Don't you dare, she said, her voice trembling. You swore we'd never talk about that. Bernilla's laughter was cruel. Why not? Your father paid him off just like he cleaned up every other one of your messes. But Daddy's not here to fix things anymore, is he? I hate you, Patricia whispered, the words heavy with finality. I hate what you've made me. I hate that I'm like you. Bernilla's laughter was bitter and unrelenting. "Oh, sweetheart, you're worse than me. At least I conned men who could afford it. You scam your own friends." The house fell silent, the air thick with the remnants of their cutting words. Then the doorbell rang again. Another courier handed over an envelope. Inside was a photograph of Sylvester, smiling at a casual dinner with new colleagues. He looked content, a man who had moved on from the chaos. Meanwhile, Patricia climbed the stairs wordlessly, leaving Bernilla standing alone in the foyer. She poured herself another glass of wine, her hands trembling. Weeks later, a plain white envelope arrived. Bernilla sat at the kitchen counter, her once manicured nails now chipped and dull. Patricia's footsteps echoed faintly as she entered the room. "Another overdue bill?" Patricia rasped. Bernilla shook her head. "It's from your father." Patricia lunged for the envelope. "Open it." Bernilla's fingers trembled as she tore the seal. Inside was a detailed record of Sylvester's financial actions since leaving, accompanied by a letter in his familiar handwriting. "Dear Bernilla and Patricia," she began, her voice faltering. "By now, you've had plenty of time to think about the consequences of your choices. Consider this my final lesson in cause and effect." "Skip the lecture," Patricia interjected. "What does he want?" Bernilla read on, her face growing paler. "He's documented everything. The accounts he closed, the memberships he canceled. It's all perfectly legal." Patricia's voice cracked. "The house?" "Foreclosure starts next week," Bernilla said hollowly. "The bank is giving us until Friday to leave." Patricia's scream echoed through the empty halls. "This is our home!" But her cries went unanswered. This was his domain, Bernilla thought bitterly. His name adorned everything. We were only visitors, carelessly spending his wealth, ridiculing his prudence, and treating him like a bank instead of a partner or a father. "Keep reading," Patricia urged, her pacing in the kitchen betraying her barely suppressed agitation. "You've had an entire month to reflect," Bernilla continued, her voice quivering. "A month to understand that your actions have consequences. A month to experience what it's like to live without someone constantly cleaning up your messes." She paused, drawing a shaky breath before continuing. "Patricia, your trust fund will remain inaccessible until you turn 30. However, provisions have been made for you to return to university under 2 strict conditions. First," she read aloud, her tone sharp, "you will reside in standard dormitory housing, not the upscale apartment you demanded. Second, you will secure a part-time position at the campus library to cover your personal expenses." Patricia let out a hysterical laugh, tinged with disbelief. "A job? Are you serious? You expect me to work like some underprivileged scholarship student?" "These terms are not negotiable," Bernilla read, her voice steady despite the tension thickening in the room. "Think of it as an opportunity to develop the discipline and character you so desperately lack." Patricia's hands trembled as she grabbed her phone, stabbing at the screen. "I'll call grandmother. She'll never allow this. She'll make it right." Bernilla kept her gaze fixed on the paper she held. "Your grandmother helped design this plan," she read softly but firmly. "Many family members support these measures. They've seen you lie, manipulate, and deceive for years. Now they'll watch you learn to stand on your own." The phone slipped from Patricia's grasp, landing on the polished floor with a hollow clatter. Her composure dissolved. "No, no, this can't be happening." "As for you, Bernilla," she read, her voice faltering now, "the divorce papers will be delivered today. My lawyer has ensured that no prominent attorney in the city will represent you. The prenuptial agreement you signed 25 years ago is ironclad." Patricia's voice rose in desperation. "There has to be something, a hidden account, some kind of backup plan." "You danced with him," Bernilla read, tears streaming down her cheeks. "So I danced out of your lives. Now you can face the consequences of your choices. The music has stopped. It's time to pay the piper." The doorbell rang, as if Sylvester himself had orchestrated the moment. Bernilla opened the door to find a courier holding a thick envelope filled with legal documents. "Mrs. Caldwell," the courier said, offering a tablet, "I need your signature to confirm receipt of the divorce papers." In a daze, Bernilla signed, the envelope's weight pulling her heart further down. Behind her, Patricia was frantically dialing family members, but every call went straight to voicemail. "No one is answering," Patricia said, her voice cracking with panic. "Mom, what are we going to do?" Before Bernilla could reply, both of their phones chimed simultaneously. Patricia opened her email first, her expression collapsing as she read. "The movers," she whispered, barely audible. "Dad hired movers. They're coming tomorrow to take everything he paid for." Bernilla's own email confirmed the grim reality. Sylvester wasn't just leaving them. He was systematically erasing every trace of himself from their lives. The artwork, the antiques, the luxuries, all of it was being stripped away. It was a calculated dismantling of the life they had so carelessly taken for granted. The doorbell rang again. This time it was Madison's mother, her expression a blend of disdain and triumph. "I'm here to discuss Patricia's debts to my daughter," she said coldly, stepping inside. "Now that it's clear you can no longer rely on your father's money, we need to establish a repayment plan." Patricia let out a bitter laugh. "I have nothing left to pay with." Madison's mother arched a brow. "Then perhaps we can explore other options. Community service, for instance. Courts are rarely sympathetic to fraud, even for the young and privileged." Her words hung in the air like the ghost of an expensive perfume they could no longer afford. Bernilla watched as Patricia crumbled under the weight of reality. Manipulation and charm were powerless this time. "I'll get my checkbook," Bernilla said hollowly. But everyone knew it was futile. Her checks would bounce, and her promises were meaningless. Their home was slipping away, piece by piece. With each chime of the doorbell, their world unraveled further. The movers arrived for Sylvester's belongings. New reminders of their failures piled up, forcing them to face the wreckage they had created. In their cramped new apartment on the unfashionable side of town, Bernilla stood in the barren living room, surrounded by the few items she could prove had been purchased with her own earnings before the marriage. "This can't be all we have," Patricia said, staring at the meager collection of possessions. "What about my crystal collection? My designer clothes?" "Your father's lawyers provided receipts for everything," Bernilla replied flatly. "Every handbag, every pair of shoes, every crystal figurine. They were all bought with his money. So, they're his." From the grimy window, they watched as neighbors unloaded second-hand furniture from a pickup truck, pieces they'd purchased from a consignment shop to replace their lost luxuries. "I can't believe we have to use someone else's old furniture," Patricia said, her face twisted in disgust. "Who knows who's even sat on that couch?" "Someone who earned it," Bernilla muttered. Then louder, "The movers charge by the hour. Help me unpack." Patricia kicked a box labeled kitchen items. "What's the point? This place is disgusting. The bathroom doesn't even have a jet tub, and I'm pretty sure I saw a roach in the hallway." "Unless you figured out how to pay for something better," Bernilla snapped, her patience at its limit. "This place is home now." She tore open a box, pulling out their remaining dishes. "At least your father arranged for you to stay in the dorms next semester." Patricia's face darkened. "Dorms? With a roommate? Like some charity case?" "You should be grateful," Bernilla shot back. "At least you still have options." The only modeling jobs Patricia could secure lately were for low-end department stores, if she managed to find any work at all. "Grateful?" Her laugh was sharp and bitter. "Grateful for what, exactly? For a part-time gig at a library? For squeezing myself into a dorm that's barely bigger than a closet? For scrolling through photos of my friends lounging in Bali while I'm stuck stacking books? Is that what I should be thankful for?" On the other side of the room, Bernilla angrily balled up some packing paper and flung it into a corner. "Do you have any idea what your father has done to me?" she snapped. "He left me with nothing. No alimony, no assets, no savings. I'm rebuilding my life from scratch at 45, and it's all because of you." Patricia clutched a designer handbag, one of the few items she had managed to keep away from the divorce proceedings, and glared at her mother. "My fault? If you hadn't flirted with John—" "Flirted?" Bernilla whirled to face her, her expression livid. "You're the one who orchestrated it, dropping little hints, nudging us together. You set the whole thing in motion, Patricia, just like you always manipulate everyone around you." Patricia's eyes hardened, and her voice dripped with venom. "Don't play innocent, Mother. Who taught me to be this way? Who made sure I understood that wealth trumps morality? Who raised me to believe we were superior to everyone else? Before Bernilla could retort, a knock at the door shattered their argument. Peering through the peephole, they saw Madison standing outside, a stack of papers in hand. "What do you want?" Patricia growled, yanking the door open. "Here to gloat?" Madison, immaculate as always, stood in stark contrast to the dingy apartment. "I brought the repayment agreement," she said coolly. "My mom says if you don't sign it today, we'll press charges." "Charges? For a loan?" Bernilla scoffed dismissively. "It's more than a loan," Madison replied, her tone icy. "We're talking fraud, identity theft. Patricia used my credit card without permission, 6 separate times. We have all the receipts." Patricia's face turned ashen. "Maddie, please. We've been friends forever." "Friends don't steal from each other," Madison cut her off, thrusting the papers into Patricia's hands. "Sign it. You'll work for my mother's company this summer, doing whatever she assigns, minimum wage. Your wages will be garnished until the debt is repaid." "Minimum wage?" Patricia stumbled back as if struck. "I've never had a real job?" Madison finished for her, her voice sharp. "We know, but that changes now." Without another word, she spun on her heel and left. The door slammed, leaving Patricia and Bernilla alone. Bernilla sank onto the couch, watching her daughter stare blankly at the document. "Did you really do it?" she asked quietly. Patricia's voice was flat. "Does it matter? You stole from Dad for years. His money, his trust. You treated him like a bank account. At least I'm honest about it." Bernilla's face fell. "Is that what you think? That I only married him for his money?" "Isn't it true?" Patricia shot back. "You've told me 100 times how boring he was, how you settled for stability instead of love. Admit it. You never cared about him. You just cared about what he could give you." The words hung heavy in the air, choking whatever scraps of affection remained between them. Finally, Patricia stood, her movements robotic. "I need to start packing for the dorm," she said. "Dad's rules, 2 suitcases max." "Patricia," Bernilla reached out, but her daughter shrugged her off, her voice trembling. "Don't, just don't. We did this to ourselves and you know it. We laughed at him, mocked him, treated him like a joke, and now he's shown us what we really are." Through the thin walls, they could hear neighbors arguing over bills and daily frustrations, a grim prelude to their new reality. The days of designer boutiques and high-end salons were long gone. "I'm going to bed," Patricia muttered as she retreated to her cramped room. "I have job applications to fill out tomorrow. Apparently, that's what normal people do." Left alone, Bernilla slumped back into the worn-out couch, her thoughts drifting to their past. She remembered sitting in their luxurious mansion, scheming and laughing together, smug in their sense of superiority. Now, she couldn't even look her daughter in the eye. Scrolling through old photos on her phone, one image caught her attention. Sylvester patiently teaching a young Patricia how to ride a bike. His face was warm, kind, qualities they had both dismissed as weakness. "We didn't deserve him," she whispered into the stillness. "And now he's gone for good." 6 months later, Sylvester Caldwell sat in his modern office, the skyline sprawling beyond his windows. Quarterly reports filled his desk, but he allowed himself a moment to reflect. His phone buzzed with a text from his realtor. "The mansion sale is final. New owners move in next week." Sylvester's lips curved into a small smile. The house had fetched an excellent price, a final victory in dismantling his old life. He had donated Bernilla's designer furniture to charity, redirected Patricia's trust fund to scholarships for disadvantaged students, and erased every lingering tie to his past. A knock at the door brought him back to the present. "Mr. Caldwell, your dinner reservation is confirmed for 7, and the team is ready for the presentation." "Thank you, Jennifer," he said warmly, appreciating her competence and professionalism. "How's your son doing with his college applications?" "Much better, thanks to the scholarship program you suggested," Jennifer replied with a bright smile. "He's really excited about studying business now." Their exchange was simple and genuine, a refreshing contrast to the manipulations and deceit that had once filled his life. The intercom buzzed again. "Sir, the university board is on the line," the receptionist said. "Put it through," Sylvester replied, lifting the phone. He listened attentively as they provided updates about Patricia's circumstances. The man relayed that she was struggling to cope with the demands of the work-study program. Twice this week, she had arrived late and voiced complaints about the physical strain. He posed a question. Should an exception be granted? Sylvester's answer was unequivocal. Under no circumstances. She needs to understand that actions have consequences, he replied, his tone firm. If she can't meet the program's requirements, she's free to leave. Ending the call, he turned to his laptop and opened the surveillance report he had ordered. The photographs painted a vivid portrait of a past he rarely revisited. There was Bernilla, stepping out of a discount store in dated attire. Patricia was pictured carrying textbooks, presumably heading to her job at the library. Their aging car sat parked in front of a shabby apartment complex. His phone buzzed, displaying a number he hadn't seen in months. He hesitated, then answered. "Sylvester," came Bernilla's voice, smaller than he remembered. "What do you want?" he asked, his tone cool and measured. "We need to talk," she said, her voice quiet. "There's nothing left to discuss," he said sharply. "The divorce is finalized. The house is sold. Everything's settled." "It's not about that," she replied, her voice wavering. "It's about Patricia. She's in trouble. She's talking about dropping out of school and moving to Miami with some guy she met online. I can't handle her anymore." "That's your issue to resolve," Sylvester said flatly. "You raised her to believe manipulation and dishonesty were acceptable. She's just applying what she learned." "She's your daughter too," Bernilla said, her voice cracking under the weight of her desperation. "Don't you care about what happens to her?" "For 18 years I cared deeply," he replied, his voice measured. "I tried to teach her values, integrity, accountability, decency. But you undermined every lesson, molding her in your image. Now you both have to face the consequences of that." Her voice dropped, barely audible. "We're barely staying afloat. Everything is falling apart. I never realized how much effort it took to maintain the life we had." "You're right," he said evenly. "You never did. While I sacrificed to build something solid, you mocked my dedication and sought out distractions. Now you're left to manage on your own." Bernilla's sobs filled the silence. "The store job doesn't even cover the rent. My modeling contacts won't take my calls. I don't know how to live like this." "That's a question you should have considered long ago," he said coldly. "Goodbye, Bernilla. Don't contact me again." He ended the call and turned to the window, gazing out at the city below. The streets hummed with life, people working, striving, contributing. For the first time, his existence felt uncluttered, free of the chaos and deceit that had defined his marriage. The intercom interrupted his thoughts. "Sir, your dinner guests have arrived early. Should I send them up?" "I'll meet them downstairs," he replied, reaching for his jacket. As the elevator descended, he reflected on the transformation of his life over the past 6 months. His business was thriving, unburdened by the frivolous expenses and shallow expectations Bernilla had imposed. His new relationships were genuine, grounded in mutual respect rather than superficiality. Even his health had improved, no longer eroded by the constant tension of managing his ex-wife's and daughter's demands. The lobby doors slid open, revealing his dinner companions, business colleagues who valued his expertise and insight. They greeted him warmly, their conversations centered on innovation and opportunity rather than gossip or schemes. "Shall we?" he asked, gesturing toward the waiting car. The vehicle was modest, a stark contrast to the luxury car Bernilla had once insisted was necessary for appearances. As they drove through the city, his phone buzzed again. A notification from the university's security office showed Patricia arguing with her library supervisor. The look on her face mirrored the same entitlement her mother had often displayed. Without hesitation, he deleted the message. Their choices had brought them here. Their actions had fractured the family he had once worked so hard to sustain. This wasn't vengeance, he thought. It was fairness. The restaurant they arrived at was understated yet elegant, free from the pretension that had defined so much of his old life. As he sat with his associates, discussing ambitious new ventures, The remnants of his past seemed to dissolve entirely. Across the city, in a decaying apartment, Bernilla and Patricia were grappling with hard lessons about respect, loyalty, and the price of betrayal. Raising his glass, Sylvester made a silent toast to fresh beginnings and final endings. The dance was over, the music had stopped, and Sylvester Caldwell had finally freed himself from those who had never truly appreciated him. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.